Good morning. Uh, I welcome you all for another session of cryptography, network security, and cyber law. Today, we'll continue our discussion on Module 3, and over here in this session, we'll discuss about authentication techniques. We'll continue our discussion which we had left in the previous session. Now, let's first recall what we discussed in the previous session. In the previous session, we have started our discussion on what we mean by authentication, and we have seen the classification of authentication. Now, authentication is a process in which out of two communicating parties, one of them will try to prove its genuinity to the other communicating party. Now, this was possible with the help of a password, or it was also possible with the help of a passphrase. Now, within this authentication, we have again two types. One is the one-way authentication technique, wherein only one communicating party is authenticating itself to the other communicating party, and mutual authentication, wherein both the communicating parties are authenticating themselves to each other. Now we will now for today we will continue our discussion on mutual authentication, and within mutual authentication we will see the impact of using keys on authentication, and we'll see it is rather better to have small session keys rather than using large keys that are routinely used. And also moving further, we'll see the use of timestamp in order to perform the mutual authentication in order to avoid a replay attack. And we were up to now we have seen the use of nonces for thwarting the replay attack, but over here we will see the use of timestamps in order to thwart the replay attack. Now next we will continue our discussion discussion on dictionary attacks. Now we will see the various types of dictionary attacks that are possible and various ways to combat these dictionary attacks. Now this is the agenda of today's session, and at the end we will conclude this session with the points discussed. Now, what are the objectives of learning? Now in this session you will be able to see the impact of timing on mutual authentication, that is the use of timestamps on mutual authentication and how they help us avoid the replay attack. And also we will see the various dictionary attacks possible, and also how to thwart these dictionary attacks. Now let's continue our discussion on mutual authentication, where we need to discuss two more topics which were left out from the previous session. Now let's look at authentication and its impact on key agreement. Now in the previous session we have already seen that authentication was performed using operations, and these operations involved long keys, and these keys needed to be shared, a secret, or it could be a private key. But the fact was these keys were very long. And now what is a good practice that can be actually adopted over here is, now these long keys which are large keys which are part of which could be a shared secret or a private key, they can be used minimally in order to reduce the probability of a compromise on such important keys. Now how do we avoid this sort of compromise on these long-term keys? Now this can be avoided by having a session key, and which is small as compared to that of the long-term keys. Now why do we go for this particular short-term keys or session keys rather than using the own shared secret or the private key? Now the first reason being that these private keys generated they are generated using very expensive operations, and also Now, in order to perform integrity or encryption, we can use small keys and fasten the process. Now, let us take an example wherein we are using secret key cryptography in order to achieve authentication, and also we are using in another scenario we are using public key cryptography in order to achieve authentication. Now, let us look at what happens in the first case. Over here we are able to achieve both mutual authentication, and we are also able to derive short term keys, that is, we are able to come or agree upon some set of short term keys or session keys, or key agreement is possible here. Now, what is being done in the first message? A is sending a message to B saying that it wants to communicate with B. For this, A is providing its identity A, and along with that it is sending a challenge RA. RA is the nonce that is sending, that A has selected, and it is sending it to B. Now, upon receiving this, B will encrypt RA along with the encryption key or the secret key that is shared between A and B. Also, B will select a new nonce or a new challenge, that is RB, and encrypt it using the key that is shared by A and B. Now, the communicating party B also selects SB. Now, over here what is SB? S is the session key that is selected by B. Now, this session key along with the nonce together is encrypted using the secret key that is shared by the communicating parties A and B, and then it is sent to A. A, upon receiving it, will decrypt the information, and then what that it has received, retrieve the challenge RB, and also it will generate its session key and send it to B. Now, this session SA, session key SA, that is sent by A to B will be again encrypted using the key that is shared between A and B. Now, upon receiving, B will decrypt this particular message, and upon decryption it is able to retrieve the session key A that is shared or sent by A. Now, both of them, what they do is they will deduce a session key. Either they can deduce by XORing the value SA and SP at A, and also B can deduce the session key by XORing the values SA and SB, and use this newly calculated session key or newly computed session key in order to perform further communication. Now, let us see what happens if you are using a public key cryptography. Now, over here again A and B are trying to communicate with each other. Now, what does A do? A will send its ID along with the ID of the recipient, that is B. It will select a nonce RA, and also because it is public key cryptography, A will include its certificate. Upon receiving all of these, B will first verify the certificate, and then after verifying the certificate, what does B do? It will select a nonce and also another session value SB. Now, over here you can see how B operates. It is selecting the information A, that is A's ID, along with the challenge that it has received from A, and it has also included its challenge RB, which will be sent to A, and then we can see that there is a new value SB which is included over here, and also it is encrypted using A's public key, and entire information is signed with B's private key, and along with this B is also sending its certificate to A. Upon receiving this information, first what will do? what will A do? A will first verify B's certificate and then decrypt this information using A's public key, retrieve SB, and after retrieving SB, it will generate a message and send it to B. Now what does this mean? Now from the B certificate, A is able to retrieve the public key and encrypt this entire signed and retrieve the entire signed information and then perform a decryption. Now after performing decryption, it is getting the content of SB. Now A will choose session key SA and then encrypt it using B's public key and include the challenge it received from B, that is RB, and also it says that this message is intended to B, and this entire information is signed using the private key of A. Now since B has already received A's certificate in the first message, it can take the public key present in that certificate to verify the information that it has received from A. Now let's look at these things this further. Now over here SA and SB are contributions to the secret key by A and B. Now what do we mean by SA and SB? They are session keys that are selected. These are random numbers. They are encrypted so that they cannot be eavesdropped. Out of these values, a session key can be deduced at both sender and the receiver. A simple way of deducing a session key is XORing the contents of SA and also SB, session key A, session key B, and getting the new session key. Now having understood why we need the small term short term keys or the session keys rather than using long term keys itself because they are very expensive, we have seen two ways in which we can get these particular session keys along with authenticating along with performing mutual authentication. Now we will move on trying to understand the impact of timestamps during authentication. Now the first question that arises here is what is the purpose of using timestamps when we already have nonces? Nonces earlier were used to prevent replay attacks. Now how was this replay attack thwarted with the help of nonces? Each party was generating a nonce which was used as a fresh challenge to the other party. It was like a one-time password which is provided to the other party. Now the recipient is often expected to sign or encrypt using its own secret key known only to the recipient. Now what is the purpose of using this nonce? It is nothing but the freshness that could be proved to the other end. Nonces are never reused. Now if they are reused, then the response to the challenge could be replayed. Now there could be a possibility of replay attack. Now an alternate to nonces is the use of timestamps. Now what is timestamping? Now timestamping a message with the current time says that this is the time at which this particular message was generated and sent to the other communicating party. Now nonce was also able to convey the freshness, whereas timestamp is also able to convey the freshness. Now timestamps are used with public key cryptography. Let's see how they are used. There are two communicating parties over here who are communicating with each other. A is trying to authenticate itself to B. Now over here A is sending its identity and it is telling to whom it is this message is intended to, that is B, and TA is the timestamp at which this particular message was created, and then SA refers to the session value that A has selected. This is a random value selected. Along with that, this entire information is signed by using the public key of B, and then also it is in turn again signed by using the private key of A, and then along with this information A certificate is included and then sent to B. Upon receiving, what will B do? B will check the certificate of A and retrieve the public key of A, and also it will first verify the information that it has received from A using its public key, its private key. Now, after performing all these operations, it will generate a message and send that message to A. Now, what does this message contain? It contains the identity of A, that is, this message is intended to A and it is coming from B, and also the timestamp it has received, it is incremented by 1 by the receiving party B, and also it includes a random number SB. Now, this random number is used to compute the session key. Now, this entire information is signed using A's public key. Because A has its private key, it will be able to retrieve the information that is present here. And over this, another signing is done, which is done by B's private key. And then along with this, B sends its own certificate so that A is able to retrieve this particular information. Now, over here in the description, we can see that in message 1, A inserts the timestamp TA in her message and signs it. B, on receiving the message, checks if the timestamp is sufficiently recent and then verifies with the timestamp signature. Now, B increments the received timestamp, inserts it into the response message to A and then signs the message. Now, over here we have used a notation wherein we have a message which is having X along with PU. This denotes that the message is encrypted using the public key of X. If the clocks maintained by A and B are synchronized, in that case the timestamp in the message 1 signed by A convinces B that the message is freshly created by A. Now, there is another requirement if you are using timestamps, and this requirement is that both the communicating parties need to be synchronized with their clocks. Now, the timestamp implicitly serves as A's challenge to B. There is no need to include the nonces over here. By signing the incremented timestamp, B hopes to satisfy A that he is indeed responding to her message. Now, having understood the impact of timestamp, how they can be used to replace the nonces in order to avoid the replay attack, we can now move on with dictionary attacks and what are the types of dictionary attacks and how we can defeat these dictionary attacks. Now, the word dictionary refers to lot of words and along with their meanings. Now, what is a dictionary attack? Now, this dictionary attack is induced for the passwords that we use. Now, there are some passwords which have very less characters in it, and some passwords that we use usually have the names of celebrities, or it could be the places names or kids names or your name along with some other special character. Now, some individuals use permutations of characters in the names of their near relatives and friends so that they are easily memorizable. Now, based on such clues, an attacker can build a dictionary of strings which are potential passwords for a particular victim. Let's say I am a person, and what does an attacker do in order to get to know my passwords? Now, attacker will try to dig into my history and also my date of birth. He may try to gain access to my date of birth, my first name, my last name, my parents' name, my pet's name, my near relatives' name, and using all of and my likes, my dislikes. Based on that, an attacker will create a dictionary of strings which could be my potential passwords. Now let's look at this table. Now we have two columns in this table, password and along with that the reason for why we say this particular password is weak. Now over here we have password 123 or ABCD. Usually whenever an admin creates an account for us, he will set the password to be some string of numbers or string or of letters. Now these are very common default passwords that are used by everybody. Now such passwords are very weak in nature. Now over here Smith is the password. Now instead of having I, there is an exclamatory symbol that is used, SM exclamatory T. Anything less than 8 characters, we assume that the password is too small and too weak. Now this is a set of password random letters which are shuffling of the name of the celebrity Shah Rukh Khan, which is spelt in backwards. Now if you see that these characters when reversed, you get the name Shah Rukh Khan. Now again there is a lot of weakness involved in such password because an attacker will obviously have various tools which will help him retrieve these jumbles. Now another type of password which usually people use is their birthdays, anniversary or days of some significance. Now these passwords, if an attacker knows you in person, will be easily able to guess the passwords and try to induce an attack. Now the next password is a permutation of letters in either mother's name or spouse's name. Over here we have taken Aisha and there is a little bit of jumbling that is performed. Now such a password is a very poor choice because the attacker will obviously have information about the person whom is trying to gain access to. Now the last password that we are having a check on is the password with the name Kolkata. Now Kolkata is a place name and usually they are already part of password dictionaries. Now there are two types of dictionary attacks that could be induced or that could be imposed. One is the online dictionary attack and the other one is the offline dictionary attack. Now let's see what happens in case of online dictionary attack. In case of an online dictionary attack, an attacker is trying to gain access into the victim's account by providing a login name. Obviously a login name can be easily accessed, and also one guessed password. Guessed passwords are used in order to log into a particular system. Let's say there is a Gmail server, and in order to access to this Gmail server, what does the attacker do? He will take the victim's login name. Along with that, he starts guessing the passwords. Now there is some limit on the number of times this fellow can guess the password. Now in case of online attack, there is a limit on the number of failed login attempts. Once these attempts are exceeded, what does the system do? The system will log that account. Now usually when you are performing an online attack, it is very difficult to get through the system with a password that is guessed. Now another possible dictionary attack is the offline attack. Now offline attack leaves very less fingerprints. In case of online attack, the system is able to track the number of attempts and block the system. Now in case of offline, one possibility is that the attacker can get hold of the password file, and then even if the passwords are transformed into something using the hash function, but still what the attacker can do is he can gain access to this file, and maybe it is not that easy for him to deduce the password. Now another possibility is that the attacker can eavesdrop the communication link that is established between the victim and the server, and then gain access to the hashed password itself and use the one in order to impose or gain access to the system. Now let's look at what's happening in this particular code. Now over here the attacker is using a dictionary of passwords to implement an attack. Now let D be an array of words containing the dictionary. Now over here let F be F of password and nonce, where PW is the password of the client, and then let a small f be the number of permissible guesses. And how do we start with this? Initially we set that we set found to false, and also I is set to 0. We keep repeating the process until the password is found. Now x is calculated, and then if this x is equal to the f, wherein f denotes the function of password and the nonce, if that is equal, in that case the attacker is able to get the correct password. That means he has found the correct password and the system returns the correct password. Now this is a bit of code that is used to induce a dictionary attack. Now the next thing that we need to see is how to defeat a dictionary attack. One approach to defeat a dictionary attack is to increase the cost of performing such an attack. Now the cost is the time to successfully complete an attack. Now in any dictionary attack, the most time consuming operation is the iteration in order to check in order to retrieve a particular password or find a particular password in the dictionary attack program. Now in this program, this operation is most expensive. Now one way to make this particular operation more expensive is by involving more or multiple hashings in it. Now when you involve multiple hashings in order to achieve this particular function f, then this will decrease the chance of an attacker to be able to find the password. Now another approach that is used to used to defeat the dictionary attack is called as encrypted key exchange protocol. Now this protocol is responsible for eliminating the offline dictionary attacks. Now this combines the Diffie-Hellman key exchange protocol along with the mutual authentication, which is based on the shared secret. Now the Diffie-Hellman key protocol, as we are aware, is vulnerable to man-in-the-middle attack. Now this is due to the fact that unauthenticated exchange of information occurs between the communicating parties, that is Alice and Bob. Now exchanges of the public keys, that is G raised to A mod P and G raised to B mod P. Now to mitigate such an attack, the encrypted key exchange protocol uses a different idea. Each side transmits its partial secret after encrypting it. Now this encryption is performed over the public key that is being transmitted from A to B or B to A. Now the encryption key PW is the hash of the password. Now let's look at this particular protocol diagram. Over here, let's say Alice and Bob are trying to communicate. Alice is sending her public key to B, so that B uses this public key to deduce the shared secret. Now what is Alice doing with the public key? She is encrypting that particular public key using the password that is shared between A and B. Now what does B do? B will also receive the information sent by Alice and send its public key, which is encrypted, and also along with that it will send a new challenge RA. Now upon receiving this information, Alice will encrypt both the challenges, one from RA, that is Alice, and one from B, which is RB, and then send it to Bob. Upon receiving this, Bob will also be able to retrieve the challenge RB and then send it back to Alice. Now after the first and the second messages that are communicated between Alice and Bob, both Alice and Bob are able to deduce the shared secret, which will be used for further communications. Now let's see how the attacker is able to impose an attack in such situations. Assume that the attacker has an access to the public key, which is encrypted, of both the communicating parties. Now in this case, the attacker tries to guess the victim's password, that is PW. If the attacker, let's say he has guessed it correctly, he obtains the true values of both the communicating parties. He is able to retrieve the public keys of both the communicating parties, but still he will not be able to obtain the session key. Now since the computational Diffie-Hellman problem is infeasible in large groups that are carefully chosen, the EKE is not susceptible to offline dictionary attack. Another property of this protocol is that it provides perfect forward secrecy. Now what is this perfect forward secrecy? A protocol is said to have perfect forward secrecy if it is not possible for an attacker to decrypt a session between A and B. Even if she records the entire encrypted session and then later at some point of time obtains or steals all the relevant long-term secrets of A and B. Now this marks the end of session 5, wherein we have discussed mutual authentication and the impact of mutual authentication with respect to large keys, which are very expensive to be calculated, and why we use the session keys or the short term keys, and how short term keys can be calculated with the secret key approach and the public key approach. Now the second topic that we discussed was the use of timestamp in order to avoid the use of nonces, and how these timestamps can be used to thwart the replay attack. And the third topic that we discussed today was what we mean by dictionary attacks and the types of dictionary attacks and the ways in which we can thwart these dictionary attacks using an EKE protocol. Now if in case you have any doubts on this particular session, you can just drop an email or ping me on this particular number. Thank you.